The night he walked away, rain fell like the sky itself was crying for her. Everyone in Aja heard the argument that night, not because it was loud, but because it was painful. Her other hand clutched her chest, as if she could physically hold her breaking heart together. In front of her stood Kunal Adeyemi, the man who had whispered promises of forever in her ear, the man who had once looked at her like she was the sun itself. Now his eyes were as cold as a winter storm. "You embarrassed me," Kunal said, his voice devoid of any warmth. Each word was a sharp icicle piercing her soul. "Do you have any idea what my family said? What they did when they found out where you came from?" Amina swallowed the lump forming in her throat. "I told you my family is poor." Kunal let out a harsh, bitter laugh that echoed in the silent room. "Poor?" He scoffed, the word dripping with disdain. "Amina, you come from nothing." Those words cut deeper than any physical blow ever could. They weren't just an insult. They were a verdict, a final judgment on her worth, her existence, her very being. The love she thought was their fortress had crumbled into dust, revealing a foundation of prejudice and pride. The man she loved, the father of her unborn child, was now a stranger looking at her with contempt. That night, Kunal packed his bags. The sound of the zipper closing was like a final, definitive end to their story. He didn't look back, didn't offer a single word of comfort or regret. He just walked out the door and out of her life, leaving her enveloped in the suffocating silence. By the time the sun's first rays pierced through the curtains, Amina was utterly alone. Alone, with a tiny life growing inside her, a secret she had yet to share. She had no idea that this heartbreaking night was only the beginning of her suffering. The storm had just begun to gather. Kunal was gone, but his family, the powerful and ruthless Adeyemis, were a different beast entirely. They were a force of nature, a dynasty built on wealth, status, and an iron will to protect their name at all costs. An heir from a woman with no name and no future was a stain they would never tolerate. What would happen when Kunal's powerful family discovered the pregnancy? How far would they go to erase this embarrassment and the innocent child she carried? Amina's solitary battle for survival, for her child's right to exist, was about to begin. She would have to find a strength she never knew she possessed to face the coming war. Returning to her village in Osun State, Amina wasn't looking for a parade, just a place to catch her breath, a shoulder to lean on. She was pregnant, alone, and terrified. She thought home would be a sanctuary. Instead, she found a locked door and a wall of judgment. Her father stood at the threshold, his face a mask of stone. He didn't even let her step inside. His finger, shaking with rage, pointed at her swollen belly. "You've brought shame upon this house," he seethed, his voice low and dangerous. "Leave. Leave now, before the neighbors see you and start their gossiping." Amina's eyes darted to her mother, who stood behind him, a silhouette of sorrow. Tears streamed down her mother's face, but she remained silent. Not a word, not a single sound of protest or comfort. That silence, that profound, deafening silence, shattered Amina more completely than her father's harsh words ever could. It was an abandonment of the deepest kind. That night, the family home remained shut. Amina found her bed beneath the sprawling branches of a familiar old mango tree. The cool night air a poor substitute for a mother's embrace. The ground was hard, the rustling leaves her only lullaby. She spent her days wandering, a ghost in her own village, surviving on the kindness of strangers who offered a piece of fruit or a cup of water, their pity a constant, stinging reminder of her situation. For 2 agonizing weeks, this was her life, a cycle of shame, hunger, and a gnawing loneliness that ate at her soul. The world she knew had shrunk to the space beneath that tree. Then, one night, the first sharp, undeniable pain ripped through her. Labor. It had begun. There was no one to call, no midwife to summon, no comforting hand to hold. Her pockets were empty, her husband was gone, and her family had turned their backs on her. In that moment of absolute desolation, alone under the vast, star-filled sky, Amina had nothing and no one. Except, she thought, for God. She gritted her teeth, sweat beading on her forehead, and surrendered to the waves of pain. It was a primal, solitary battle against fear and exhaustion. The night was long, filled with her muffled cries and desperate prayers whispered into the darkness. But as the first rays of dawn painted the sky in soft hues of pink and orange, a new sound broke the silence. A tiny, fragile cry. Amina, trembling and utterly spent, looked down at the small life nestled in her arms. A daughter. She carefully wrapped the newborn in her old, worn wrapper, the cloth now soaked with the sweat of her labor, and the tears of 100 different emotions: pain, relief, fear, and an overwhelming, unexpected surge of love. She looked at her daughter's perfect, tiny face and knew, with a certainty that anchored her reeling spirit, that this child was not a source of shame. She was a miracle, a treasure. Zara. Amina whispered, the name a promise. It meant princess or priceless. Because even here, at the absolute bottom, with nothing to her name but the ragged clothes on her back and a heart full of wounds, Amina knew her child was the most valuable thing in the universe. She had survived the night. She had brought a new life into the world. But now, the real challenge began. How could a woman, rejected and penniless, raise a child in a world that had shown her nothing but cruelty? With only faith as her guide and a newborn to protect, where would she even start? Life in Lagos was cruel, a concrete jungle that swallowed dreams and spat out despair. For Amina, it was a daily battle. By day, the scorching sun beat down on her as she weaved through the chaotic traffic, her voice a small cry in the city's roar, selling bags of sachet water just to make a few naira. When the sun finally set, her work wasn't over. She'd find her way to a bustling roadside buka, a small food stall, where she'd spend hours hunched over a tub of greasy water, washing an endless mountain of plates. Her hands were raw, her back ached, but the thought of her first child, little Ada, kept her going. Then, one evening, a ghost from her past appeared. He stood there, a shadow in the flickering lantern light of the buka. He looked different, thinner, his usual swagger replaced by a desperate slump in his shoulders. He begged. He pleaded. He spun a web of apologies, each word coated in a sweetness she hadn't heard in years. He swore he had changed, that he had made a terrible mistake. He painted a beautiful picture of their future, a life together, a proper family. And then, he said the one word she had always longed to hear from him: marriage. He promised her marriage. Against her better judgment, against the scars he had already left on her heart, she let herself believe him. The loneliness of the city was a heavy weight, and his promises felt like a lifeline. He moved back in, and for a short while, it felt like a dream. The small, cramped room felt a little warmer, a little less empty. But dreams have a way of shattering. A few months later, the familiar sickness returned. She was pregnant again. The moment she told him, the light tuja in his eyes vanished. The apologies stopped. One morning, she woke up, and he was gone. His few belongings vanished. Kunal had disappeared, and this time, she knew in her bones it was for good. There would be no more apologies, no more fleeting returns. The months that followed were a blur of exhaustion and growing panic. Her belly swelled, making it harder to hawk water, harder to stand for hours washing plates. The city that had once seemed indifferent now felt openly hostile. 9 months later, her water broke. The labor was long and agonizing, made worse by the suffocating Lagos heat. And just as her second child was about to enter the world, the entire neighborhood was plunged into darkness. A power cut. The baby was born in the pitch black, his first cries piercing the sudden, unnerving silence. It was a boy. She named him Yusuf. Amina lay on the thin mat, sweat-soaked and utterly drained, cradling her newborn son. Her first child, Ada, slept soundly in the corner, oblivious to the new arrival and the fresh wave of despair. Tears streamed down Amina's face, mixing with the sweat. They weren't tears of joy. They were tears of pure, undiluted fear. She looked from Yusuf's tiny, wrinkled face to the sleeping form of Ada and whispered into the oppressive darkness, "My children, I don't know how we will survive." The blackout outside was a perfect mirror of the suffocating darkness that was closing in on her future. It felt like the end, but in the deepest, most desperate moments, something has to give. Would poverty and betrayal finally break her spirit, or would this second blow awaken a strength she never knew she possessed? Amina did everything. Well, everything except steal. Her hands, once soft, were now calloused from a life she never chose. She cleaned toilets in the sprawling homes of the rich, scrubbing away at stains she couldn't see in her own life. She'd spend hours under the scorching sun, the smell of roasted corn clinging to her clothes, selling just enough to buy a little rice. Then there were the construction sites, where she carried heavy bags of cement, her small frame straining under the weight, dust and grit her constant companions. The world wasn't kind. People would whisper, and sometimes they weren't even quiet about it. "Look at her," they'd sneer. "2 children and no husband to speak of." Their laughter felt like stones thrown at her. "What a pitiful life," they'd mock, shaking their heads as if her struggle was a spectacle for their amusement. Amina heard them all. At night, when the city finally fell silent and her 2 children were asleep, that's when the mask would fall. She would curl up on her thin mat, the day's exhaustion pressing down on her, and the tears would finally come. She cried quietly, stifling her sobs into her pillow so her children wouldn't hear their mother's heartbreak. The loneliness was a heavy blanket, the weight of providing for them a mountain she had to climb every single day. She mourned the life she could have had, the husband she lost, the dreams that had turned to dust. The nights were her only time to grieve, to let the pain wash over her in the darkness. But even in her deepest sorrow, a small, stubborn flame refused to be extinguished. It was the thought of her children, their innocent, sleeping faces, that kept her from being consumed by despair. Because hunger does not respect tears. It's a relentless beast that demands to be fed. So, every single morning, no matter how little she had slept, no matter how much her body ached, Amina stood up again. She would wash her face with cold water, chasing away the ghosts of the night. She'd look at her son and daughter, their sleepy smiles the only fuel she needed, and she would find her strength. She would tie her head wrap, straighten her worn-out dress, and face the world one more time. For them. It was always for them. She was a warrior in a battle no one else saw, armed with nothing but a mother's unyielding love. She had to be strong. She had to endure, because their survival depended entirely on her. One sweltering afternoon, she was scrubbing the marble floors in the mansion of Mrs. Adewale, a woman known for her lavish parties and cold demeanor. Amina worked diligently, her movements practiced and efficient, trying to remain invisible as always. Mrs. Adewale, usually distant, was home earlier than expected. She watched Amina for a moment, her eyes tracing the lines of exhaustion on the younger woman's face. Later, as Amina was packing up to leave, Mrs. Adewale called her into the study. Amina's heart pounded. Had she done something wrong? Was she about to lose one of the few jobs she had? Mrs. Adewale held up a small, faded photograph she had found tucked away in an old book. It showed a smiling young man. Amina's breath caught in her throat. Mrs. Adewale's voice was soft, almost a whisper, as she asked a question that would unravel everything Amina thought she knew about her past and her future. What was on that photograph, and what secret connection did this wealthy woman have to Amina's long-lost husband? The truth was far more shocking than she could ever imagine. A hidden history, a betrayal, and a forgotten promise were all about to come to light, triggered by this one old photograph. What did Mrs. Adewale know? And how would this revelation change Amina's life forever? One afternoon, a new opportunity led Amina and Zara to a magnificent mansion, its entrance marked by a grand, white gate. This was the home of the Adeyemi family. As Amina got to work, cleaning and organizing the sprawling rooms, she couldn't help but feel a strange sense of unease. It wasn't just the opulence of the house. It was the way its owner, Mrs. Adeyemi, looked at Zara. Her gaze was intense, analytical, and filled with a peculiar, unreadable emotion. Zara, oblivious and innocent, played quietly in a corner, her small hands busy with a toy car. Mrs. Adeyemi watched her every move, her brow furrowed in deep thought. Finally, she approached, her voice soft but carrying a weight that made the air heavy. "What a beautiful child," she began, her eyes never leaving Zara's face. She then turned to Amina, her question sharp and direct. "Who is her father?" The question hit Amina like a physical blow. She froze, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. That name, Adeyemi, it echoed in the deepest, most guarded corners of her memory, a name she had spent years trying to forget, a name tied to a past she had desperately tried to bury. A wave of panic washed over her. She just shook her head, hoping her silence would be enough to end the conversation. But Mrs. Adeyemi wasn't deterred. She didn't press for an answer, but a flicker of understanding, or perhaps suspicion, crossed her face. For the rest of the day, Amina felt the weight of that stare. Mrs. Adeyemi's eyes followed Zara relentlessly. It was as if she was searching for a ghost in Zara's features, a familiar shadow in the curve of her smile or the shape of her eyes. Every time Zara laughed, every time she called out, "Mama," Amina felt Mrs. Adeyemi's gaze intensify. The air in the mansion grew thick with unspoken questions and simmering secrets. Amina worked with a desperate efficiency, her only thought to finish her tasks and escape this house that felt more like a beautifully decorated trap. She kept Zara close, as if her physical presence could shield her daughter from the invisible scrutiny that hung in the air. As the sun began to set, casting long, eerie shadows across the polished floors, Amina finally packed their belongings. She collected her payment, her hands trembling slightly as she took the money from Mrs. Adeyemi. Their eyes met for a brief, tense moment. Amina saw a storm of emotions in the older woman's eyes: curiosity, confusion, and something else, something that looked almost like recognition. Amina quickly ushered Zara out of the house, her heart still racing. The heavy white gate clicked shut behind them, but the feeling of being watched lingered long after they had left the mansion's grounds. That night, safely back in their small room, Amina held Zara a little tighter, stroking her hair as she slept. The peace she usually felt watching her daughter was shattered by the events of the day. A deep-seated fear, a ghost from her past, had been stirred. Meanwhile, back in the quiet luxury of the mansion, Mrs. Adeyemi stood by her window, staring out into the darkness. She replayed the day's events in her mind. The image of the little girl, Zara, burned into her memory. The child's resemblance to someone she once knew was too strong to ignore, too startling to be a mere coincidence. With a decisive movement, she walked over to her desk and picked up the phone. Her fingers dialed a familiar number, but laced with urgency when the call was answered. "Hello. I think you need to come home." The past was no longer buried. It was knocking on the door. Weeks crawled by, each one heavier than the last, stretching the silence between Amina and her past into a thin, fragile thread. The city hummed with its usual rhythm, but inside her small apartment, time seemed to stand still, held captive by unanswered questions. The children, oblivious to the storm brewing in their mother's heart, filled the rooms with laughter and games, their innocent world a stark contrast to the turmoil that consumed her. Amina watched them, a fierce, protective love warring with a gnawing fear. How long could she shield them from a truth she herself didn't fully understand? Every knock on the door, every ring of the phone, sent a jolt of anxiety through her. She was living on a knife's edge, waiting for the other shoe to drop. She tried to lose herself in the routine of motherhood, packing lunches, helping with homework, reading bedtime stories. But even in these simple moments, Connell's shadow loomed large, a ghost from a life she had desperately tried to bury. She'd see his smile in her son's mischievous grin, or hear the echo of his voice in her daughter's thoughtful questions. He was everywhere and nowhere, a constant, silent presence. Then, one Tuesday afternoon, it arrived. Not with a bang, but with the quiet rustle of paper. It was a formal-looking envelope, stiff and official, addressed to her in crisp, unfamiliar handwriting. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she slid it open with trembling fingers. The air grew thick, heavy, as she unfolded the letter. Her eyes scanned the first few lines, and the words blurred into a haze. She read them again, and then a third time, willing them to mean something else. But the message was brutally clear. Colonel Adeyemi was dead. A car accident, the letter stated, sudden and final. A wave of dizziness washed over Amina, and she gripped the kitchen counter to steady herself. It wasn't grief that hit her, not in the traditional sense. It was a complex, suffocating mix of shock, a strange, hollow relief, and a profound sense of an ending that felt like no ending at all. The man who had been the source of her greatest joy and her deepest pain was gone. Just like that, she sank into a chair, the letter clutched in her hand. The world outside her window seemed to mute, the sounds of the city fading into a distant hum. Dead. All those years of wondering, of fearing his return, of imagining a confrontation that would never happen, it all dissolved into this one stark fact. A part of her felt cheated, robbed of the chance to face him, to demand answers, to finally hear him say what? She didn't even know anymore. But as her eyes drifted back to the page, she realized the shock was far from over. There was more. Tucked away in the cold, legalistic language of the second paragraph was a sentence that made the blood freeze in her veins. It was a formal request, an invitation from the Adeyemi family's legal representative. Her children, it said, were invited to participate in a DNA test to confirm their lineage. The words leaped off the page, branding themselves onto her mind. Her knees gave way. The carefully constructed walls she had built around her life, around her secret, crumbled into dust. This wasn't just about her anymore. Destiny, it seemed, had not forgotten her. After all these years of hiding, it had found her address. It was knocking on her door, not with a gentle tap, but with the force of a battering ram. The truth she had guarded so fiercely was about to be dragged into the light. The question that screamed in her soul was terrifyingly simple. Would this truth finally set them free, or would it unleash a new kind of pain, one far greater than she could ever imagine? The answer lay on the other side of that test, a precipice from which there was no turning back. So, the moment we've all been waiting for has finally arrived. After weeks of tension, speculation, and whispered secrets, the DNA results are in. The envelope is opened, the report is read, and the truth is undeniable. Zara and Yusuf are, without a shadow of a doubt, Adeyemi children. This single piece of paper confirms everything Amina has been saying, validating her struggle and the identity of her kids. Imagine the scene at the Adeyemi mansion. The confirmation hits the family like a tidal wave, and the first one to break is the matriarch herself, Mrs. Adeyemi. The woman who once stood as a formidable wall against Amina, who was so sure, so unyielding in her disbelief, completely crumbles. We see a side of Mrs. Adeyemi we've never seen before. Her pride, her certainty, it all washes away, replaced by a flood of regret. The sound of her weeping echoes through the grand house, each sob a testament to her profound mistake. She turns to Amina, the woman she once cast out, the mother of her own grandchildren. Her words are heavy with the weight of her past actions. "I chased you away once," she confesses, her voice choked with emotion. "Forgive me." It's a powerful moment. A plea for forgiveness from the person who caused so much pain. You'd think this would be the heartwarming reunion we've been hoping for, the happy ending where everyone comes together. But the story reminds us that forgiveness isn't simple. It's not a switch you can just flip. The author brilliantly captures this complexity with the line, "But forgiveness is not cheap." Think about everything Amina has been through. She was publicly shamed, cast out, and left to raise her children alone, all while carrying the heavy burden of the truth. She faced hardship and judgment, her character questioned at every turn. Her children grew up without their father's family, all because of one person's refusal to believe her. Can a simple "forgive me" erase all those years of pain? Can it mend the deep wounds inflicted on her and her children? This is the question that hangs in the air as the chapter ends. Mrs. Adeyemi has extended an olive branch, admitting her fault and asking for a new beginning. The Adeyemi family, now faced with the undeniable truth, seems ready to welcome Zara and Yusuf into the fold. They are, after all, family, blood, but the decision rests entirely on Amina's shoulders. And that's where we're left with a massive cliffhanger. Will Amina accept the apology? Will she let go of the past and embrace the family that once rejected her so cruelly? Or is the damage too deep, the betrayal too great to overcome? What would you do in her position? Would you forgive for the sake of your children, or would you protect your heart from the people who broke it? This chapter forces us to consider the true cost of forgiveness and whether some wounds can ever truly heal. The Adeyemis want to rewrite the past, but Amina is the one holding the pen. Her choice will determine the future for everyone involved. You know, sometimes life throws you a curveball, something you never saw coming. Imagine being in a situation where you have nothing, where every single day is a struggle just to put food on the table for your kids. Now, picture someone walking up to you and offering you a solution. A way out. A mountain of cash, enough to change your life forever. That's exactly what happened to Amina. The Adeyemis, a family dripping with wealth and influence, came to her. They saw her children, her precious little ones, and they saw a transaction. They offered her money, a life-altering sum, for them. Now, pause for a second and really think about that. What would you do? The sleepless nights, the hunger, the constant worry for your children's future, it could all disappear. Just like that. A simple yes would mean they'd have everything they could ever want. The best schools, the finest clothes, a future free from the poverty that was choking Amina. It's a temptation that would cripple most people. It's the kind of choice that keeps you awake at night, wrestling with your own soul. The world would tell you to take the money. Common sense screams to take the money. Your own empty stomach probably pleads with you to take the money. But Amina was different. She looked at the stacks of bills. Then she looked into the eyes of Mrs. Adeyemi, a woman who believed anything could be bought. And with a strength that seemed to come from the very earth beneath her feet, she gave her answer. A firm, unshakable no. Her words echoed with a power that money could never buy. She said, "My children will not grow up believing they were bought." Can you feel the weight of that statement? She was teaching her children, in that single moment, their true worth. It wasn't a number on a check. It was immeasurable. This wasn't just a refusal. It was a declaration. A declaration that her pride as a mother, her love for her children, was not for sale. She was protecting their identity, their very sense of self. She was ensuring they would grow up knowing they were cherished, not purchased. In a world where everything has a price tag, Amina drew a line in the sand. And something incredible happened. Mrs. Adeyemi, a woman used to getting her way, a woman who probably hadn't bowed to anyone in years, looked at this poor, resolute mother. And in that moment, she bowed her head. It was a gesture of respect, of acknowledgement. For the first time, Amina wasn't just a poor woman to be pitted or bought. She was seen, truly seen for the queen she was. This single act of defiance, this monumental choice, changed everything. The power dynamic shifted in that room, but it also sent ripples into the future, creating a new, uncertain path. Amina had chosen pride over prosperity, but what did that mean for her children's destiny? She had secured their dignity, but had she condemned them to a life of struggle? Her decision to refuse the Adeyemi's offer wasn't an end. It was a beginning. A beginning of a new chapter, one where the fate of her children hung precariously in the balance, shaped by a mother's unshakable love. Years just flew by, like pages turning in a book. And with each passing year, Zara and Yusuf weren't just growing up, they were transforming. Zara, my little girl, became absolutely brilliant. It was like watching a star ignite. Her mind was so sharp, so quick. She devoured books, asked questions that would leave me speechless, and tackled problems with a fierce intelligence that was just breathtaking to witness. And Yusuf, my boy, he found his discipline. He wasn't the scattered, restless child anymore. He developed this incredible focus, a quiet determination that was as strong as steel. Whether it was on the sports field or in his studies, he had this unwavering commitment. He learned to channel all his energy, to be patient, and to work harder than anyone else I knew. They were a team, my children, pushing each other, supporting each other, their bond forged in our small, love-filled home. Then, the letters started arriving. Big, official-looking envelopes. Scholarships. These weren't just letters, they were keys. Keys to doors we never even dared to dream were unlocked for us. Doors to prestigious schools, to opportunities that seemed like they belonged in a different world, a world far from our humble beginnings. The world was finally starting to see what I had seen all along, the incredible potential shining within my children. I still remember the feeling of walking into those grand school auditoriums for the award ceremonies. The polished floors, the rows of proud parents. And there I was, the woman people used to whisper about, the one they mocked for her struggles. I'd sit there, my back straight, my heart swelling with a pride so immense it felt like it could lift me right out of my seat. I'd watch Zara walk across the stage, her name called out for another academic achievement, the applause echoing in the hall. I'd see Yusuf, standing tall, receiving accolades for his leadership and his dedication. In those moments, the whispers of the past seemed to fade away. The judgmental stares, the pitying looks, they all melted under the bright lights of my children's success. I would just sit there, a quiet smile on my face, soaking it all in. This was it. This was everything I had worked for, everything I had sacrificed for. Seeing them up there, recognized and celebrated, was my reward. It was a validation that our struggle, our journey, had all been worth it. But as I sat there, surrounded by the sounds of success, a question would sometimes creep into the back of my mind, a quiet, nagging thought. We had come so far. Were they powerful enough to truly heal the wounds of the past? Could success really erase the scars left by years of hardship and judgment? Or were they just hiding beneath the surface, waiting for a moment of weakness to reappear? The future was bright, but the shadows of yesterday were long. Amina's journey home was one she had replayed in her mind 1,000 times, yet the reality was heavier, more profound. The dust of the familiar paths coated her sandals, each step a ghost of a memory. The village hadn't changed, not really. The same ancient baobab tree stood guard at the entrance, its branches like gnarled arms reaching for the sky. The same sun-baked huts huddled together, smoke curling lazily from their thatched roofs. But she had changed. The world had etched its stories onto her soul, and she was no longer the girl who had fled in fear and sorrow. She was a woman returning with a quiet strength that hummed just beneath her skin. As she walked through the central square, whispers followed her like a shadow. Heads turned, eyes widened in disbelief, then recognition. An old woman dropped her water pot, the clay shattering against the hard-packed earth, the sound echoing the breaking of a long-held silence. The name, Amina, rippled through the crowd, a wave of shock and wonder. Children, born long after she'd gone, stared at the stranger who seemed to hold the village captive with her mere presence. She saw faces she knew, weathered, aged by time and hardship, but undeniably the faces of her people. Then she saw him, her father. He stood frozen near the elders' council fire, his frame stooped, his hair as white as the river foam. He looked smaller than she remembered, diminished by the weight of years and, perhaps, regret. His eyes, once so full of fire and unbending pride, were now clouded with a deep, haunting sorrow. As their gazes met across the bustling square, the world seemed to fall away. There was only the chasm of lost years between a father and his daughter. He took a hesitant step, then another, his movements stiff and uncertain. The crowd parted for him, a silent, respectful corridor opening in the sea of people. When he reached her, he didn't speak. His breath hitched, and his body trembled, not in anger, not in defiance, but in complete surrender. He fell at her feet, his hands clutching the hem of her travel-worn dress, his forehead pressed against the dusty ground. A sob tore from his chest, raw and ragged. "I was wrong," he cried, his voice muffled by the earth. "Can you ever forgive this foolish old man?" The entire village held its breath. Amina looked down at the shaking shoulders of her father. There was no triumph in her heart, no satisfaction in seeing him brought so low. There was only a profound sadness for the time they had lost, for the pain they had both endured. She knelt, her movements full of a grace and compassion that seemed almost otherworldly. Gently, she placed her hands on his arms and lifted him. His body was frail in her grasp. She brought him to his feet, holding him steady as he looked into her eyes, searching for condemnation, for anger, for the hatred he surely deserved. But he found none of it. He found only a calm, clear depth, like a pool of still water after a storm. "I survived," Amina said, her voice soft but clear enough for all to hear. "And I did so without hatred in my heart. Hate is a poison, Father. It corrodes the vessel that holds it long before it ever touches its target. I chose to live." She had not just endured, she had grown. She faced them, not as a victim, but as a force, but as a testament to the power of forgiveness and the resilience of the human spirit. And as the sun began to set, casting long, golden rays over the humbled village, a new question hung in the air, silent yet powerful. What final, enduring lesson would Amina's remarkable life teach them all? Years flew by, each one a testament to Amina's unwavering dedication. The little seeds she had planted with so much love and sacrifice had grown into mighty trees. Zara, with her sharp mind and even sharper sense of justice, became a formidable lawyer. She stood in courtrooms, her voice clear and strong, a champion for those who had no voice, just as her mother had been for her. Yusuf, with his gentle hands and compassionate heart, became a respected doctor. He moved through hospital wards, a beacon of hope, healing the sick and comforting the weary, embodying the very care his mother had shown him every single day. Their lives were a world away from the dusty, cramped room they had once called home. They had achieved success, respect, and financial security, but they never forgot where they came from. The memory of their mother was the foundation upon which they built their lives. Every success was a tribute to her, Every challenge overcome was a reflection of her strength. One evening, Zara was invited for a primetime television interview. She was a rising star in the legal world, known for her passionate advocacy and a string of high-profile victories for the underprivileged. She sat under the bright studio lights, poised and confident. The host asked her about her inspiration, her driving force. Zara smiled, a gentle, knowing smile that reached her eyes. "My inspiration," she began, her voice steady, "has always been my mother, Amina." The name hung in the air, filled with a history the audience couldn't yet know. Many people see where I am today, but they don't see the journey. They don't see the woman who made it all possible. She took a breath and continued, her words painting a vivid picture for the millions watching. "My mother was abandoned by her family when she married my father. After he passed, she was left with nothing but two small children and a world that seemed determined to crush her. She was poor, yes. By every measure society has, she was destitute. She worked herself to the bone, mending clothes for pennies, scrubbing floors until her hands were raw, just so my brother and I could eat, just so we could have a single pencil for school." Her voice became softer, filled with a profound emotion that captivated the entire nation. "She often went hungry so we could be full. She faced scorn and judgment, but she never let it touch her spirit. My mother was poor, but poverty never defined her. Her love defined her. Her sacrifice defined her. Her unwavering belief in us, in our future, that is what defined her." A hush fell over the studio. Zara's story was not just her own. It was the story of countless unsung heroes, of mothers who build futures from the ashes of their own dreams. It resonated deeply with everyone listening, a powerful reminder of the silent, immense strength that love can provide. The interview became a viral sensation, touching hearts across the country and beyond. Amina's story, once hidden in the shadows of poverty, was now a source of inspiration for millions. Zara and Yusuf knew their mother's legacy was more than just their success. It was in the lessons she taught them, the values she instilled. After the interview, they felt a renewed sense of purpose. They decided to go through their mother's few remaining belongings, which they had carefully preserved. Tucked away in a small, worn wooden box, they found an old, folded letter. It was her handwriting, faint but clear. It was a letter addressed to them, a final message she had left behind, waiting for the right moment to be found. With trembling hands, they unfolded the paper, ready to hear their mother's voice one last time. What final wisdom, what final piece of her heart had Amina left for her children? Amina stood at the podium one final time, the lights of the stage feeling both warm and incredibly distant. The hall was silent, every eye fixed on her. But to gather the weight of the years she was about to share. Her voice, when it came, was soft, yet it carried to the furthest corner of the room, each word resonating with a lifetime of struggle and triumph. "I was poor," she began, the words simple, yet heavy with meaning. "I remember the nights when the only thing in my cupboard was a single can of beans, and I had to decide if my child or I would eat. I remember patching up holes in shoes with cardboard and praying it would rain on the walk to school. The world has a way of making you feel small when you have nothing. It whispers in your ear that you are insignificant, that your struggles are your own fault." She paused, her gaze sweeping across the faces in the audience. She saw recognition in their eyes, nods of understanding, the quiet pain of shared experience. They see the worn-out clothes, the tired eyes, the constant worry etched on your face, and they label you, as if that single word is the sum of your entire existence. And for a long time, I believed them. I felt like a ghost in my own life, just trying to survive until the next sunrise. But then, she continued, her voice gaining strength, a spark igniting in her eyes. "One day, I was looking at my child. He was drawing a picture with a broken crayon on a scrap of paper I'd found. He drew our tiny apartment, but he added a huge, beautiful garden outside. He drew me, not with tired lines on my face, but with a crown on my head. He saw me as a queen. In his eyes, our little world wasn't lacking. It was a kingdom, and I was its protector." A smile touched her lips, a genuine, radiant smile that transformed her face. They could see the lack of money, the absence of material wealth. But what they couldn't see was the richness inside me. They couldn't see the fierce, unyielding love for my child that fueled me every single day. They couldn't see the creativity it took to turn one potato into a feast for two. They couldn't see the determination it took to study after my child was asleep, fighting exhaustion to build a better future, page by painstaking page. Her voice rose with passion, each word a declaration. Poverty can take your home. It can take your comfort. It can even take your pride for a little while. But it cannot take your purpose. It cannot touch the fire in your soul. I looked at the world and I said, "You can call me poor. Fine." But I was never, ever useless. The words hung in the air, powerful and defiant. I was a mother, a teacher, a nurse, a chef. I was everything my child needed me to be. My hands may have been empty of cash, but they were full of love. My schedule was packed, not with social events, but with bedtime stories and scraped-knee kisses. My worth wasn't in a bank account. It was in the bright, hopeful eyes of the little boy who believed his mother was a queen. Amina's eyes glistened, but her voice remained steady. So I stand here today, not as a woman who escaped poverty, but as a woman who refused to be defined by it. The journey was long. It was brutal. There were days I wanted to collapse and just give up. But then I would see that drawing, the one with the crown, and I would get back up. I would fight one more day. The room was electric. A single person stood up, then another, and another, until the entire auditorium was on its feet. The applause started as a ripple and grew into a thunderous wave, a roar of validation and shared humanity. Tears were falling freely now, not just from Amina, but from countless people in the crowd. And somewhere in that hall, in every home where this speech was being heard, every single mother who felt unseen. Every person who felt trapped by their circumstances felt a flicker of hope ignite a forgotten strength stirring within them. Never, ever underestimate a woman who refuses to give up. Never underestimate anyone fighting a battle you can't see. Poverty can bend you. It can push you to your absolute limits. But your purpose will always be the force that lifts you back up. And love, that real, unconditional love, it's the truth that always, always returns to you, reminding you of who you truly are. Thank you for listening. So, if you had a good time with this story, it would mean the world to me if you could hit that like button. And if you don't want to miss out on what's coming next, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications.